Welcome back, one and all, to another show, another week, another Dantastic Monday with Dan Evans. Dan, it continues to be great to have you here.
For those who are disappointed by saying, Dan, where's Fran? I tell you, I'm disappointed too. But I'm here anyways, so we can all be disappointed together. But honestly, no, despite that disappointment, and I am happy to be here, honestly, of course I am. But there's some great news today for Democrats.
It's actually good news.
It's not even infrastructure week. I'm telling you, I'm really happy about this for once. This is very promising, and Republicans are going to be seething a lot for the rest of the week. So buckle up for that.
Yeah, last week was a weirdly positive week, and the weekend was good too. What is going on in America? Anyway, thank you for being here. I believe we have you for one more Monday after this. I think.
I believe so.
Exactly how it works out. Maybe two. We're gonna figure it out. But anyway, this has probably already been clear, but Dan has been doing it's so nice and awesome of him that he has been willing to fill in for week after week after week. He's a busy guy that does a lot. So we do appreciate it, Dan. Thank you for giving us your time and lending your perspective. We do appreciate it.
Yeah, truly my pleasure.
Well, as Dan was saying, we have some good news to talk about very soon. Not all of it is amazing. This is still America. It's still 2022. So what are you gonna do? But we're gonna be running through a bunch of it. We will be talking, as we so often do, about the monologue on Saturday Night Live. We'll be talking about that in a little bit. Why shouldn't we? All of the incentives to discuss it online seem to be in place. We won't be pilloried by people. Anyway, stick around for the aftermath for the worst Karen, and stress the air in Karen, in quite some time. Amazon robots, as well as news from around the world in Meanwhile In. But before all of that, if you wouldn't mind hitting the like button and sharing the stream, that would be great. And if you want to send us any comments, tweets, or super chats, we'll respond as we go. But with all that said, Dan, are you ready to start the show?
If someone wasn't ready, just a producer question. If someone wasn't ready, have you ever like paused the show right then and there to like actually stop? Or is it just like a courtesy?
I'm ready to. It's never been the case that nobody's been ready. It has often been the case that someone has derailed the show when I ask that, though. Brett is usually willing to do that. So anyway, but regardless, I'm gonna move into this. Before we get into our regularly scheduled rundown, though, I do want to let you know there are developments in the devastating University of Virginia shooting. 3 people, as of the last time I had saw, 3 football players had been fatally shot last night. The suspect is in custody right now. They had about a half a day of a shelter-in-place order. You can only imagine for all of those students how terrified they were that they could potentially be targeted next. But the suspect has been identified as Christopher Darnell Jones Jr. Classes have been canceled throughout today. I am assuming things will probably go back to whatever passes for order after a terrible shooting like this tomorrow. There is some initial word coming out of the suspect having had a gun in the last few months and some potential concerns, but we are right on the cusp of this information coming out. So there's very little more than that I can say at this point. Dan, do you have any thoughts? I know that this is like literally just coming out right now.
Yeah, I've been following this shooting, of course, as others have, and there aren't a lot of details that are coming out. The fact that all the victims and apparently one of the suspects so far, or maybe the only suspect, appear to all be football related or ex-football related, seems to be kind of shocking and adds a layer of tragedy to it, of course, because these are athletes who are usually at the top of their peak of their careers and they're really trying to make it, and oftentimes it's seen as a way of economic mobility for these players. And so you really feel a lot of pain for this community. You feel a lot of pain for the school. Like it's hard to say this is an area of the country anymore that knows mass shootings, because like what area of the country hasn't at this point? Maybe rural Alaska, knock on wood, but like it's shocking and terrible to see every single time. You only hope, and like for those who do subscribe to, pray that those involved can kind of seek the help they can. But of course, we all know the reality that oftentimes these things kind of keep cascading, and until we make meaningful change about how gun culture is in this country, how gun society just like works in America, you're just kind of see these things keep happening.
Yeah, and again, like we could do all sorts of speculation, but like I know people are saying, I'm seeing someone in the chat saying he'd recently been cut from the team. I hadn't actually seen that. it seems like based on the fact that he was a player, the people who were killed were players, that this was, I guess, a more personal thing rather than a totally random act of violence. Does that make it better, worse? I don't know. Feels at this point like it doesn't matter. It's another shooting happening. Just devastating. I don't know anything about the weapon. I'm sure we'll find out more about if people had concerns, the sort of flow of information that comes after these sorts of things. But for right now, this is what we know. Tragically, at least 3 people have lost their lives, but it seems like they have the suspect. I'm assuming it is the only one. We'll see if any more information comes out. With that said, though, we did promise some more positive news, and that we can actually now deliver. So why don't we transition into our first main topic for the day? Last week went surprisingly well for the Democrats. Well, what about this weekend? To give you an idea of some of the political developments, take a look at this bleat from Donald Trump that says, "Just another giant election scam. Wake up, America." So not well for the Republicans, it's looking like. Donald Trump was actually seen at his daughter's wedding rehearsal looking, in the words of the New York Post, grumpy. Now that might be because of the political developments, or it might just be that celebrating another human, even a member of his family, is an inconvenience for him. But more likely it's probably because of the call that happened during the wedding that Cortez Masto, senator in Nevada, is keeping her seat. And that is great news because that means that with that call and the call earlier of Blake Masters being defeated by Mark Kelly, no matter what happens in the runoff that's gonna come in Georgia, the Democrats have maintained control of the Senate. And really fast, we showed you that screenshot, if you could bring it up again. I think this was like Axios or something like that of Masto winning. We chose that because that's like a nice reputable source or whatever. But to give you an idea of my life, the way that I found out about this over the weekend was this tweet from Francesca Fiorentini in all caps saying, suck my left one, GOP. Cortez Masto wins Nevada, run and hide, bitch. So that's how I get my news. And I only mention this because first of all, I love and miss Francesca, but also like that's what I'm gonna miss about Twitter, that you can learn about the fate of the Senate from a tweet like that. And it's soon not gonna be there anymore. But anyway, she won, Mark Kelly won, and that means that right now it is 50-49, potentially could be 51-49, which would be a great way to cancel out one of the worst Democrats' votes. So I wanna stop here for a second, Dan, because we know that it's still likely the Republicans are gonna take the House. That's important, that's unfortunate. But having the Senate is really important, not only for like potentially Biden being like convicted in the Senate or whatever, that's probably not gonna happen. But being able to, for instance, get Supreme Court justices and confirm other judges, of which there are dozens of vacancies already. This is super significant. What do you think?
This is exciting, if not that it takes away the leverage that any one senator, usually it was Joe Manchin, could have over the entire legislative process. And while there will be much less of a legislative process to have now that, as you said, John, it's likely that the Republicans will take the House. 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, even months ago, otherwise despite the news of Roe v. Wade being struck down, this was assumed to be another good red year for Republicans. And the fact that it's being looked at like, listen, there's still some people who are saying there is a non-insignificant chance that Democrats hold the House, just as non-insignificant as it was that Democrats retained the Senate, which it actually ended up happening. So I don't fully subscribe to that yet because just the statistics aren't there. But I am, at least at the time of recording right now, the Republicans haven't hit 218 also. But I think the fact that a supposed red wave that not just the status quo thought of for the past year, but Republicans thought of up until like minutes before going live on election night is good because it's beating the morale out of them. It's good because it's sending, you're getting one of those moments where the Donald Trump wing of the party and the F Donald Trump wing of the party are starting to actually spin and collide together. There's actually concern about tomorrow, if and when Donald Trump makes his official announcement to run for president, if that'll once again make sure he has the magic touch and loses Georgia for the Republican Party again. Like that would be phenomenal for me. My philosophy, as you know, is let them fight.mp4. But I really want, I think we should revel in the good news, but also keep in mind that, and my last point on here is that the Democratic Party is going to, as they often do, say this is how good we are doing as we are doing our job. Let's keep doing our status quo job. And I think what AOC is saying is, no, let's remember that this is once again the victory that was carried by progressives and shows that progressive politics are very popular and they should be fought for and advocated for at every step of the way.
Yeah, no, 100%. And we should also bear in mind, like, this is important for multiple levels of reasons. So one, it's another indication that the midterms didn't go the Republicans' way. So everything that they were campaigning on, that they seem to think is what politics should be about, demonizing trans people, taking away rights, all that, didn't succeed for them. Pushing the big lie, turns out, might get some people to watch your stupid channel or whatever, but it's probably not gonna get senators elected. So that's good. That's the very immediate reason. The secondary reason is for the next couple of years, it means that some things will be able to be done by Joe Biden, especially when it comes to the courts, which are incredibly important. But also it's important beyond that because everything depends on everything that came before. We have to be, when it comes to politics, like Littlefinger and fight every battle everywhere at all times. What's gonna come out of 2024 is going to depend on this. It could end up being a really bad year for the Democrats in the Senate, in which case having maintained the seats that they have right now mitigates the damage that can be done in 2024. Or if it's a good year for the Democrats, then it's all the more important that we got these wins now, because then maybe we can really blow past all of the worst excesses of the worst neo-libs in the Senate. So all of this incredibly important. And even if the Republicans do take the House, which it looks like they probably will, it's gonna be a much more narrow margin than it looked like it would have been, which means retaking it significantly easier next time around. And so all of these are important, and it's also important that we draw the right lessons coming out of this. Now, I wanna turn to the Republican attempt to draw lessons. Donald Trump is almost a week into being largely blamed for what happened to the Republicans, which makes sense. He is their leader and he has demanded all of the credit for their successes. So here's the dark opposite side of that, Donald Trump. But he doesn't want that blame, of course. And he is attempting to cast it on to someone else, Mitch McConnell. So he has bleated, it's Mitch McConnell's fault. Spending money to defeat great Republican candidates instead of backing Blake Masters and others was a big mistake. Giving $4 trillion to the radical left for the Green New Deal, not infrastructure, which didn't happen, was an even bigger mistake. He blew the midterms and everyone despises him and his otherwise lovely wife, Coco Chow, because why shouldn't he throw some anti-Asian racism into there? How fun for America. But he's not the only one that's blaming Mitch McConnell. Ted Cruz, who I guess is still trying to appeal to the Trump side of the party rather than switching over to DeSantis. He went on his dumb podcast and talked about how Mitch McConnell is responsible for this. Bear in mind, Mitch McConnell sucks. He's terrible. He's one of the worst people. He's a broken old crow, as we're so often reminded. But he didn't want these terrible candidates. He didn't want Blake Masters. He didn't want Herschel Walker. He didn't want Dr. Oz. If they had gone with the sort of otherwise awful candidates that Mitch McConnell would have supported, they might well have taken control of the Senate. Ted Cruz knows that. He knows how terrible these candidates were. All of this is political positioning. This is him trying to lend support to Donald Trump because I guess he still thinks he needs that. But anyway, we've been talking about this now for about a week, Dan, about to what extent Trump is culpable, to what extent that influences his decision to, as you said earlier in the show, apparently he is going to announce tomorrow how that may influence things like the Georgia runoff. What do you think about the blame and where it should lie?
I think, there's, as with all elections, there's a lot of blame to go around. I think that the Republicans clearly I think they pivoted too soon. If they had run with crime a little bit sooner than they had been doing trans panic and cancel culture stuff, then maybe it would have settled a little bit more and actually moved the needle a little bit. But I don't think any Republican down the line was actually talking about any policy issues substantively. And so Democrats who are saying, listen, we're talking about substantive things like abortion, student debt relief, handling inflation to some extent. I think that actually Democrats did some good things and actually doing aggressive politics there. Much more could have been done, but they're defending against these Trump type people. But I think it's very rich that Trump is comparing in that, I love how you call them bleeds, in that Truth Social post or whatever, that, oh, if only the Republican Party had gone with people I had supported, like Blake Masters or whatever. And I got this information from none other than Ben Shapiro, who's super plugged into Republican politics, as you know. Apparently, Donald Trump sent out email blasts for Blake Masters, where something like 90% plus of the money that was going from this email blast was going to the Trump campaign, as opposed to Blake Masters' campaign.
Really fast, let me tell you. So they did the thing where, like when you do a Humble Bundle, the money goes to multiple people, and you can set what percentage goes to which, but they fill in a suggested split. And I believe it was 5% going to Blake Masters and 90% going, 90 or 95. I forget if there was a third option going to Trump. It was the most insulting fundraising email I've ever seen in my life.
And on the Democratic side, we've talked about this, how the Democratic Party like suctions like money from at the House and the Senate level, and they use it on those races, and they don't really go aggressively on state and local down ballot races. And we've talked about that and we've criticized that for years and years and years. There's clips on that on end. Now that's happening on the Republican side, so that's definitely a major part to blame here.
Yeah. I can't believe he's gonna announce tomorrow. Like, thank you. Again, like Dan always says, let them fight. Like, yeah, no, Godzilla, you stand up out of the water. You get out, and then, hey, you gigantic monkey that lives in Florida, just go have at it or whatever. I'm gonna watch and we're gonna have fun. It's gonna be a lot of fun for a solid year. I can't wait.
It's like Stay Puft versus Godzilla. That's what I really think it's like. You pick which is which.
That's true. That's totally true. Oh God, they're gonna be so vicious to each other. I can't wait.
No, wait. Sorry, last thing. You're already, thank God, America listens to the damage report. They're already putting out the feelers of the Trump campaign going, hey, remember when Ron DeSantis made videos of teaching his baby the art of the deal? Mm-hmm. Yes.
You know what? Tomorrow, I love Dan being this happy. What has happened to America that we're in a good mood, and it's stayed this way for a while? Anyway, I think we're gonna remind people that ad tomorrow on the show. I think we're gonna bring that back. For two reasons. One, to remind people, and two, like maybe put it back on the radar of Trump, so you can attack Ron DeSantis with it. Anyway, let's turn to, there's a couple more quick angles on this I wanna make sure that we get to. Last Friday on the show, I was talking we were interviewing Madeline Peltz, and I was talking about how I was surprised by the relative lack of claims of voter fraud coming out of this election, especially considering everything that's happened in the past couple of years. And I still stand by that mostly, but there is an area where now that sort of faux concern is coalescing. And you can see it in this race. So the Arizona governor's race still hasn't been decided. Right now, Katie Hobbs, as of the last count, was up by something like 27,000 votes. There's still a good percentage to come in. The vote could very much go either way. But there are people who are worried about this, and it's clear from the social media activity. I mean, Donald Trump is on Truth Social talking about Kari Lake's easy election win being slowly, systematically drained away from her. He blames mail-in ballots, long election counts, many-day elections. Remember, the Republicans passed the law to make it so you couldn't start counting those mail-in ballots early. They created this situation so they could whine about it, and they're mid-whine. Machines that very few people understand. I love when he just admits that he doesn't understand stuff. Massive counting centers. Why would it be better if they're small? Would that make it faster? I don't understand. Anyway, he's saying he believes it's being stolen. On Fox and Friends, you have Pete Hegseth saying you're watching a threat to democracy in Arizona. Sean Hannity saying that votes have magically appeared in Arizona, and Kari Lake has almost not stopped talking about how it's being stolen for a solid week now. Again, bear in mind, it's very, very close, and she might well end up winning this race. But a lot of that attention about like stop the steal and all that stuff has now flown into this one race. They see her as very important to that wing of the party in the future. So they're not bringing evidence. That's never stopped them in the past, Dan. I'm sure Dinesh D'Souza is gonna make a whole movie out of what's going on in Arizona. But what do you think about this? Do you have any prediction about how that race is gonna go? And should we be worried about actual like attacks or anything like that?
Three things. One, John Autorola, after the election night we had, I'm out of the predictions game for like a couple months. I'm retired. That ship has sailed. I am not gonna be doing that, especially in races that are this close. Point number two, I guess I'll make the serious point in that I've been warning on the show previously and a lot before and for a long time on a lot of different outlets that we need to be concerned about election denialism, especially when it happens at the state level. Because ultimately in America, the elections happen at the state level. It's usually the Secretary of State within an individual state that administers those elections. And then on a local level, it's done on either a county basis or a precinct basis. Eventually, each state gets to do it their own way. And so you need to watch out for Republicans trying to fill these roles with their own people so that you avoid a situation where if Republicans win, the election was valid, and if Democrats win, the election was rigged. And we've already tried to warn about the tactics. I think the media did a largely great job, mainstream and independent and otherwise, saying a lot of these votes are gonna come in very slowly. We won't know on election day, especially states that do mail-in ballots and count them on a long basis are gonna take a little while. And things are just gonna be very close regardless in these states. But the other funny thing is that I tend to read polls by trends and I tend to read like votes the same way. And it's definitely hard to do on a state by state basis. But if the Democrats have done this well and overperformed this well, and this is still in consideration, at bare minimum, it lays the groundwork for future elections. But at maximum, the Republicans are just gonna be seething even more.
Yeah, which I'm here for, honestly.
Happy, cool.
By the way, you mentioned our predictions, so just really fast. I think we both agreed that we were cautiously pessimistic, I think is the term we used. And so it turned out a little bit better than we thought, but I'm not gonna go through all of it. I've got my predictions. The only two that aren't decided, I have Katie Hobbs winning and she's currently up. I have Raphael Warnock winning and he was up in the vote, we'll find out. All the rest of them are right. Every single one. Now I make terrible predictions. If you were living in Eastern Ukraine, don't listen to my predictions earlier this year about whether Russia's gonna invade you. I make a lot of bad predictions, but so far, all of them turned out right. And it's not because of amazing like insight. I looked at the polls and stuff, and that's the way I thought it would go. But anyway, we do have one race that was not on these that could still go one of two very different ways. So let's jump into one more. Well, I'll just briefly mention Karen Bass is up in the LA mayor's race. There's still a lot of the vote to come in. LA is super slow and can't counter their vote, but she is up. So another good day in LA. But anyway, with that said, let's turn to the other major race we gotta give you an update on. I've been on the edge of my seat waiting to find out what's gonna happen with Lauren Boebert. The race has yet to be called. It is incredibly close still. More than 95% of the votes are in, and she's got about 1,100 votes on Adam Frisch, which is way closer than this race had any right to be. Unfortunately, it looks like the race won't be decided until at least Thursday. So it's still gonna take a few more days to be called. And bear in mind that even after that, it's likely to go to a recount, which could take days, weeks. I don't know, we live in a hell world, months, I don't know. So it's gonna take a little while. In advance of that though, Adam Frisch is reminding people that there's thousands of ballots to come in from active duty military service members. Says that a recount is likely, and then goes on to say, we need funds to get the job done of this recount and make sure that every ballot is counted. So he's asking for money to be donated. On the other side, Lauren Boebert is doing the same. Aside from that, and weighing in to say that the Republican leadership votes should be delayed until the race is determined, Lauren Boebert has been quieter than I have seen her in literally years, waiting to find out what's gonna happen to her. So for once, we have a lot in common with her. We just wanna know what's gonna happen. Dan, what do you think?
It's nice to see these people fall. You get a couple of these ghouls and you're gonna get a couple of other ones. Listen, you trade your Lauren Boebert and you get your JD Vance. It's take a penny, leave a penny at the US Congress, all right? So like sometimes you take L's where you can get them and you take W's where you can get them, and this is great. You also can't count your chickens before they hatch, to just throw metaphors out the window as possibly as quickly as I can. But I really I really want there to be the reality that Lauren Boebert is far away from the halls of power as possible. I like that she is in this position where at least she's not right now trying to sow the seeds of election denial or like, oh, the election is rigged, because it would be hilarious if she really dug into that and then all of a sudden she won. But I also believe, maybe this could be cynical of me, but I think just like it'd be very hard to run a Republican election denial style campaign in like California, I think it's, not that extreme, but harder to do that kind of thing in Colorado. I just don't think the Colorado voters, a place where John Hickenlooper got elected to Senate, are going to like really, or like ran for Senate. Sorry, I don't think he won, but like a place where John Hickenlooper was like representative of there for governor, I believe. I don't think they're going to accept that kind of election denial stuff.
Yeah, well, we'll see. What does seem clear is that even if she does manage to hold her lead, which there's pretty good chances of that, and recounts don't generally overturn the results of elections. So I still think it's more likely that she will win. This is how close it was with basically no money and attention going into it. Like we talked about that race a few times because Adam Frisch had a few good things to say. There was some interesting, like in terms of resources going in, it wasn't really there. If she manages to squeak by, she better watch out in 2 years, because I feel like she'll have 2 more years to say crazy things and embarrass her district. The Democrats will probably actually invest in it next time, maybe with an even stronger candidate. I don't know. And again, credit to Adam Frisch for running the campaign that he did. But if she does manage to survive, I don't see how she does in 2 years. This is just so close in a race where it should not have been, and economic times that should benefit the Republicans. Anyway, with that said, we do have to take our first break. We come back though, we're gonna mix it up, talk about SNL and some of the stuff that happened there after this. Michael Gonzalez says, Bernie is clearly Yoda, so who is Luke? I mean, see, I don't know. That's interesting. I gotta figure out all those analogies. Okay, well, with that said, not everything was awesome over the weekend. Sometimes needless bad stuff happens. And so with that, we bring you our Monday Menace. This weekend on SNL, Dave Chappelle once again hosted, and in his monologue, which was delivered very much like his stand-up comedy, he addressed the issues recently with Kanye West and Kyrie Irving and a lot of the anti-Semitism that's been flowing around. And let me pointlessly and ineffectually jump out in advance of his biggest defenders online by saying, Dave Chappelle is one of my favorite comedians of all time. He is still very, incisive in his read of a lot of what's going on in American politics and culture. Still very funny, including on that episode of SNL. That said, he's a big boy, he's a full-grown person who can say whatever he wants. He's famous and rich. He's going to be able to say whatever he wants. And in honor of his stance that people should say what they think, I'm gonna say what I think. And so you can stop with your comments to me. If you believe that people like me shouldn't express our opinions, then that applies to you too, so don't comment at me. I personally think you should also be able to say whatever you want. So in the tradition of free speech, we're gonna talk about what we think about his monologue. I'm gonna read just a few of the comments. There were good points and there were bad points to it. There were funny parts and then there were serious parts. He said at the very beginning, I denounce anti-Semitism in all its forms and I stand with my friends in the Jewish community. Then he said, and that, Kanye, is how you buy yourself some time, which is funny, admittedly. Some of the other stuff, not necessarily so much. We're gonna gradually get into that. He says, I learned that there are 2 words in the English language that you should never say together in sequence. And those words are the and Jews. I think it would be great advice for a lot of people to stop talking about those 2 words in sequence the way that they want to. But he does say in the monologue that he'd been to Hollywood, and based on his own travels, it's a lot of Jews, like a lot, but that doesn't mean anything. There's a lot of black people in Ferguson. That doesn't mean they run the place. That said, before we jump into our discussion, he has gotten negative reactions for some of the things he said, including from the ADL. Perhaps things like, if they're black, then it's a gang. If they're Italian, it's a mob. But if they're Jewish, it's a coincidence and you should never speak about it. But that doesn't mean anything. Again, his thing about Ferguson. He says, I know the Jewish people have been through some terrible things all over the world, but you can't blame that on black Americans. That was part of his defense of Kyrie Irving. Apparently believing that people's criticism of Kyrie Irving is believing that he's responsible for the Holocaust, which is not my read of what the criticism is about. But anyway, there's a lot in that. Dan, what did you make of the monologue?
I made of the monologue that, yeah, I think that Dave Chappelle at a time was one of the most incisive, culturally biting comedians that you had out there. But he is constantly going towards this. I think he's lost that edge because even today, because he now has a lack of power. Maybe he never had a power analysis. Maybe I'm just too much of a Marxist to really enjoy this anymore. But and when it comes to his trans commentary, or when it comes to this stuff, it always seems like he is not, he's always blaming it on he's using the out of, I either just don't have the education or other people just don't have the education about this. How should you expect Kyrie Irving to know about these things? Or he's using the out of, oh, it's just comedy, it's just jokes. Why can't I use free speech? Not understanding power dynamics in any situation whatsoever. This is most annoying because the soundbite that I heard before any of the other things where he starts to pepper his speeches a little bit more, were the Kanye, this is how you buy some time quote. And then the second one about if they're black, it's a gang. If they're Italian, it's a mob. But if they're Jewish, it's a coincidence. You should never speak about it. I think some history that should be important to be taught is, the history of redlining, that thing that the Federal Housing Administration, so the US government, used to make sure that it was harder for blacks and Latinos and Asian people who lived in America to build their communities. The same thing happened for Jewish people. You can look from the sky and see which neighborhoods were redlined, and you could look at the meanings of why the neighborhoods were redlined in places like Los Angeles and New York, and see, oh, the neighborhoods that were redlined were because of subversive Jewish elements bringing down the property values. So there's been this anti-Semitism and that's from the 1920s in America. There's been this anti-Semitism that has been going on in this country for years. And yeah, sure, it's not black people's fault to understand it, but I also expect that Jewish people shouldn't say the N-word either, right? Just because, okay, maybe, yeah, it's maybe there weren't maybe not all the slave owners were Jewish, sure, right? And maybe some of them were. I don't really care to get in that argument, right? But this whole secondary idea that's also going on, that, oh, how come when you say something about Jewish people, you get shut down, but when you say something about black people, nothing happens, as though the George Floyd stuff did not happen, as though time didn't, all businesses didn't rush to put out their pandering statements to black people and still do Juneteenth things. And we all joke about it on Twitter every February on Black History Month, as if these things don't happen. You could make the same thing and say, oh, there's all these black people who are athletes, right? Do black people own sports? No. These are things that I wish Dave Chappelle used his talents and use his platform to articulate for an audience of black people who are unfortunately listening to Kyrie Irving and Kanye West things and falling into some of the anti-Semitic traps and tropes that no one seems to want to get them out of.
Yeah, look, I would say I think he probably thinks that this is speaking truth to power, to a power that he thinks exists and that others aren't identifying. But the issue is that is in a similar neighborhood as to what Kanye West probably thinks he's doing. Again, he knows the cultural context. He knows, as we're gonna be talking about in just a little bit, that there's a lot of anti-Semitic attacks. He understands that. I'm sure that he thinks that these are things that need to be said. I do think that that's what the core of his comedy and commentary is. I just think, I don't know, after a lot of years and being, kind of rich and kind of disconnected from things, maybe your read of that gets to be a little bit off. And a lot of comedians start to develop this obsession with, how dare you tell me what to say? But again, if you think that free speech and being able to say whatever you want is the most important thing, then how dare you tell me I can't criticize what you say? I'm using my speech in the same way you are to a much smaller platform. You have a lot more power than I do. And then there are little things like, again, the Kyrie Irving thing, as if people's criticism of him is that he or black people committed the Holocaust. Nobody is saying that. You're not responsible for the Holocaust. You're responsible for what you say. That's what you're responsible for. And his defensiveness, like about Adidas dropping Kanye West, like as if Kanye West is entitled to the shoe deal. Adidas or any shoe company or any promotion gives those deals because of your persona, your influence, your platform. If you choose to nuke that, then the only reason they gave it to you isn't worth that to them anymore. Why would they keep paying you for something that you have chosen to devalue? Again,
if you turn from,
sorry, continue.
I was gonna say, if you turn from Kanye the shoe guy to Kanye the Jew guy, then it's no longer profitable for them to keep marketing you as the shoe guy. That was the only point I was gonna make.
Yeah, totally. And again, like I understand some people who think that if you criticize Dave Chappelle, then you've never liked him or you never got him. Like, dude, get off my back. I've been listening to Dave Chappelle for literally decades. I've seen him perform in person. Again, one of my all-time favorite comedians. You do not possess a position of superiority in terms of being able to tell me if I can criticize people. That is actually what free speech is about, not just endlessly supporting people when they're both good and when they're wrong. So anyway, he can choose to focus on whatever he wants, and whatever he focuses on is gonna go out to a massive amount of people who like and respect him, or at least will be exposed to his words. He chooses to make it about certain things. And I think some of what he said was productive, but it was also at points undercut by some similarities in how he thinks about the power structure and entertainment, in the same way that he chooses to make a recurring part of each of his specials about the trans community. That is a choice that he is making with his free speech rights that we get to criticize with our free speech rights. And that's all I'm saying. We're not cancel culturing as if we could cancel this multi-millionaire. We're not doing that. We just also are exercising our ability to say what we think. That's it. So get off my back. Anyway, with that said, that's a perfectly fine episode of the show, by the way. I thought Dave Chappelle's Game of Thrones sketch was great. I thought that was very funny. So anyway, not that that'll count to anything to his blind defenders. With that said, why don't we turn to one more topic really fast. Let's jump into this video.
It's really nice to have a lot of noise made, not by protesters, outside of my house. Thank you all for being here tonight.
That's fun. That's Amy Coney Barrett, who recently voted to strip away access to abortion rights from many, many Americans, talking to a group of right-wing lawyers saying, I like this more than protesters. Well, yeah, you probably would. I expect that you would very much prefer to surround yourself by like-minded people who are unified with you in pursuit of these culture war wins to placate enough Republicans that you guys can maintain control over the policy you actually care about, which is keeping everyone in that room's taxes as low as possible. But look at that, like she knows why she's being protested. She knows that many people, many women in particular, feel betrayed by her for what she chose to do, how she obfuscated her position on reproductive rights during her confirmation, and then immediately turned around and destroyed those rights. But it is nice for her to get a little bit of applause. Dan, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a little bit sort of snide. I mean, I guess sure, it's a joke to be made that she can necessarily make with her free speech and her rights that she has, but it's also rights that are being taken away from people that are on the line here. And I just don't have a lot of love for these judges. I think it's very aware that this Supreme Court has become very politicized, more so than at least the intent was, which is funny considering these people claim to be constitutional originalists. I don't think partisan courts was in the Constitution, nor were political parties, but I digress. I think this just highlights one of the other many situations that, okay, now the Democrats at least have the Senate, like, make it rain when it comes to approving federal judge appointments. Like whatever you can do, the pipelines that Republicans built to have people like Amy Coney Barrett and Justice Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court existed for 10, 20, 30, 40 years and were built by the Republican Party to install people like that who were ideologues. If we can't court pack, we've got to be doing the same.
Yeah. Yeah, and really fast, I just want to go to, again, no, like seeing her there, just delighting in this, this is the only people that she wants to talk to, wealthy right-wingers. That's who she wants to talk to. Being so happy about that after at her confirmation saying, I'm answering a lot of questions about Roe. I'm jumping ahead of the second graphic, which I think indicates that Roe doesn't fall in that category of a super precedent. And scholars across the spectrum say that doesn't mean that Roe should be overruled, but descriptively, it does mean that it's a case, not a case that everyone has accepted and doesn't call for its overruling. So there, look, she's, I guess in her defense, not doing what some of the others who voted to destroy Roe v. Wade did, which said it's a precedent, we will not overrule it, and then they turn around and overrule it. There, she's like, I mean, I just don't know. I mean, there's people who believe both things, and what are we supposed to believe? That she's still making up her mind? She's a mid-40s lawyer who definitely knows that she wants to destroy it at that point, but also knows that she has to pretend that she doesn't. And it's possible that there are some right-wingers in the chat right now. They're like, no, that's good. I like that. I like that she lied to everyone about what she believed, because they don't realize in saying that what they're saying is, I believe that there should just be partisan ideological judges. I would prefer that they be on my side, but in doing this, I am setting the stage for the other side to put forward clear, dishonest ideologues to accomplish their goals judicially that they can't accomplish legislatively. If you like it when Amy Coney Barrett does it, and you like it when she's like gleefully joking about what she managed to pull over on the American people, well, enjoy the precedent, the super precedent that you're setting. You're saying that Biden should put forward ideologues. And honestly, he should talk to them behind closed doors, find out what they really believe, and then they should lie to everyone while they're being confirmed. Won't that be fun? That is the actual precedent you're setting. Any final thoughts before we go to break?
No, I think you put it pretty well.
Oh, thank you. That's very nice of you. Okay, well, in that case, we are gonna take a break. When we come back, we get a lot more to talk about, so don't go anywhere. By the way, Donald Trump's Bowen Spurs in the chat says the prototype for the Hyperloop is now a parking lot. Yes, I did see that in the last few days. That's one of the reasons, yeah, not a huge fan of Elon Musk, is all of these amazing things that if you were actually to put his ability to manage real engineers in, maybe they would have accomplished, but he just keeps on moving into new things. By the way, he's been in charge of Twitter for like weeks now. It's like, what the hell is going on at Tesla? Do they not need a CEO? Because they don't have one now for literally weeks. Either that matters, in which case this is irresponsible of him, or it doesn't matter, in which case, what's the point of CEOs, honestly?
Well, it's almost as to keep my comments short, because of course they could be very long. It's almost as if meritocracy is a lie, John.
It's almost like that. It's almost like that.
Not quite, but almost.
Okay, well, with that, why don't we move into our last probably topic of the hour. A suspect has been arrested in threats that were made to a synagogue in New Jersey. And all of the details about this individual are, I will say, upsetting at the very least. So this is an 18-year-old teenager who made some incredibly violent threats, including wanting to use a Molotov cocktail on a Jewish person, wanting to curb stomp LGBTQ people, all of this written online. Authorities say, though, the teen defended himself by saying that he was just LARPing as a terrorist, that is live action role playing, when he wrote and shared the attack plan. He has been charged with transmitting a threat. It turns out that claims of LARPing is not necessarily the amazing legal defense as you might think it is. FBI Newark's Twitter account put out this statement saying they've received credible information of a broad threat to synagogues in New Jersey. And thankfully, they leaped into action and actually did something about it. So let's give you some more details about the threats that were made. The defendant used social media to send a manifesto containing a threat to attack a synagogue based on his hatred of Jews. The screed was called When Swords Collide, talked about wanting to attack and kill Jewish people, as well as lionizing leaders of, for instance, Al-Qaeda and ISIS, including Osama bin Laden. The suspect allegedly told people he planned the attack as revenge for the Christchurch, New Zealand attack, where a neo-Nazi killed 51 Muslims. He allegedly was also a fan of Dylann Roof, the white supremacist, because he killed Christians and said that, quote, the attack would involve bombings, shootings, and maybe beheadings. Of course, Dylann Roof was hoping to start some sort of race war in that attack. This individual seems to want to continue some sort of religious war by targeting Jewish people in a synagogue. Anyway, he told officers he wasn't definitely gonna carry out the plan. In October, he told someone online he was 50-50, and then told officers that he was just LARPing, but keeps going back and forth, telling people literally while being hauled into a hospital for a mental health check that he was going to do the attack, but then he claims that he wasn't. The issue is that when you go back and forth like that, that's not a wash. It's not, well, who's to say? We kind of have to lean towards this is a person who's regularly making threats against synagogues. We should probably take it seriously. Dan, what do you think?
Yeah, this is when LARPing goes wrong. I mean, hopefully people, even kids, should understand, even regardless of the state of America's educational system, that Nazis are bad and targets of anti-Semitism like this shouldn't be acceptable. Like, kids love to play around and be edgy when they're in middle school and high school, and like I completely understand and remember that. But it should never get to the point where you're like making credible threats and joking or not joking or anything like that, an actual synagogue. And it just goes to show, at any time or situation or place where you have these things that are okay, and country and in a society where these things have happened in recent history, where anti-Semitism is something that is very often in the public discourse for ridiculous reasons. This has to do with a lot with celebrity culture. It's a shame that we continue to kind of let these things fester, even among youth sometimes, because this is often where it begins. Then you see people who then make excuses like, oh, I didn't even know that stuff was Nazi, or I didn't even know that stuff was anti-Semitic, or I didn't even know that stuff, because they're caught at such a young age, and people, parents, teachers, communities don't catch that and go, hey, let's calm that down a little bit. Let's talk about the context of why this is a bad thing. It's kind of a shame.
Yeah, and look at again, I'm sure there's a lot to these online screeds that this person has said that we don't know in terms of motivation, but specifically citing wanting revenge for Muslims being killed by a neo-Nazi in New Zealand. That like, first of all, if it had been a Jewish person that did it, that wouldn't make it okay. But can we also point out that it wasn't a Jewish person that did it? So like a hate-filled right-winger kills Muslims. So you, being filled with hate, decide you need to kill Jewish people? Why don't you guys just fight? How about that? What isn't the right? Go gather somewhere in the mountains and you can wipe each other out. If all you want to do is play with guns and LARP or whatever, maybe you can work it out between yourselves, because a lot of people are just trying to live. Jewish people just trying to worship in synagogues, Muslims trying to worship in their mosques in New Zealand. None of them want to be involved in your BS. Anyway, look, I don't know what to make of this person. By the way, the suspect has been identified as Omar Al-Katul. They're saying, like, he was telling them he wanted to do it, but he didn't have the balls to do it. He didn't want to get shot or die. Again, that's not reassuring. That just implies that maybe you're gonna look for some way to kill people where you won't be caught or killed. But again, it's just this endless loop of extremism, radicalization online, and violence against people that have literally nothing to do with it, targeting innocent, in many cases, religious people. Again, like this is why we talk a lot about anti-Semitism on the show, because these sorts of things happen constantly. There's a lot of types of mass violence in America, a lot of types of political violence in America. But we also, like, very specifically, cannot go very long between attacks and threats against synagogues. Can we be clear about that? Anyway, any other thoughts, Dan?
Yeah, it just shows the need for actual conversations in schools and on shows like this about history and class and politics, because all of those, and race and religion, because all of those really play importantly together. Yeah, 100%. Thankfully, they caught this person. I don't know what the consequences are going to be, but as much as, look, we're very critical of cops, I think rightly so, a lot. But thankfully, in a lot of cases, the FBI does do good job of tracking these people down before they're able to commit these horrendous attacks.
With that said, though, we are unfortunately out of time in our first hour. Thank you, everyone listening to the podcast of linear platforms. But if you're on our other platforms, there's a lot more to come in the aftermath. Dan and I will be back, so don't go anywhere.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Adarola. I'll see you soon.